So welcome to One Hero a Day, where everyday courage lives on. Like and subscribe to hear a new story each night. The frost hadn't yet melted on the fields of Greene County, Iowa, when the morning bell echoed through the halls of the middle school. It was the kind of cold that made metal sting to the touch, the kind that clung to your sleeves and whispered under your collar. Kids shuffled in from the buses with flushed cheeks and clouded breaths, rubbing their hands together, stomping their boots dry at the threshold. No one noticed the whisper of smoke curling up from the far corner of the building. Not yet. Inside, the hum of everyday life returned. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, the distant chatter of math problems and cafeteria gossip. Lucas was already in his seat, second row from the back, third desk from the left. He never sat by the window. He didn't like attention. Next to him, Harley was adjusting the little blue blanket he kept folded on his lap. His wheelchair didn't fit comfortably under the desk, so he often angled himself sideways, close enough to see the board, far enough to avoid bumping into others. Harley's hands moved slowly that morning. It wasn't one of his better days. Some days his arms responded. Some days they didn't. Lucas noticed. He always noticed. "Want help with your pencil case?" Lucas asked, barely more than a whisper. Harley nodded. Lucas reached over, opened the zip, and laid the pens out gently, one by one. They didn't say much. They rarely did. But that wasn't silence. It was comfort. It was routine. Lucas had been helping Harley since 5th grade, since that snowy day when the ramp had been frozen and Lucas was the only one who stopped to help. Outside, the sky held that flat, winter-white light, the kind that made time feel slower. In room 12B, life ticked by like any other day. But under the floorboards, something else ticked too. Down near the aging furnace, a crack had formed in one of the pipes. Just a hairline at first. Barely enough to notice, but enough. No one saw the tiny puff of smoke that escaped the basement at 8:17 a.m. No one noticed the first spark drift toward the wooden rafter at 8:19. And by 8:26, when Ms. Hartwell asked the class to open their science books to page 47, something was already growing. Quiet, hidden, hungry. Lucas had his head down. He wasn't thinking about fire. He was wondering if Harley had remembered his inhaler. There was a heaviness to that morning, the kind you only recognize when you look back. Lucas would later say he felt something in his chest, but couldn't name it. Just a stillness, like air before thunder. By the time the fire alarm rang at 8:42, nothing in their world would ever be the same again. The school hallways were never kind to Lucas. He wasn't fast, wasn't strong, didn't talk much. He had the kind of quiet presence that made him invisible to most, except when someone needed a target. Some kids are born with broad shoulders and loud voices. Lucas wasn't one of them. He walked with his head down, his hands often tucked in his sleeves, and a quietness that seemed to make other boys uneasy. They called him names, sometimes under their breath, sometimes not. Weak, stick boy, lame duck. Harley, on the other hand, moved through the same halls with a kind of unspoken defiance. His wheelchair made a soft hum on the linoleum, and though his body didn't work the way it used to, his eyes did all the talking. Calm, alert, and often sharper than the adults around him. He had a wit about him, dry, measured, and occasionally biting. He could slice a class clown's joke in half with one sentence, then turn and smile like nothing happened. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The paralyzed boy was the one who stood up for the quiet kid. But that wasn't where their story began. It started in 5th grade, when Lucas noticed Harley struggling alone at the base of a snow-packed ramp. Everyone else had rushed inside, avoiding the cold. Lucas, without a word, stepped behind the chair, took the handles, and slowly pushed. It wasn't easy. His boots slipped, and his breath fogged the air like smoke. But they made it up. Together. Harley didn't thank him, not in words. But the next day, he rolled up next to Lucas during lunch and said, "You eat slow." I like that. That was the beginning. They didn't talk much about the things other kids did. No Pokemon, no football scores, no YouTube stunts. They talked about clouds, and sometimes animals. Lucas liked to draw birds. Harley liked to read about foxes. Over time, there was a rhythm to their friendship. Lucas would carry Harley's backpack. Harley would block insults with a sharp glance. Lucas knew how to fold Harley's hoodie just right, so it didn't bunch behind his neck. Harley knew which teachers would let Lucas sit near him without asking. They weren't a loud pair. They weren't the kind of kids teachers noticed with gold stars. But they noticed each other, and in small ways, they made each day a little easier for the other. Still, to most of the school, Lucas was just that skinny kid who couldn't climb the rope in gym class. He failed his mile run, dropped the ball during flag football, once cried after getting elbowed by a 7th grader. But Harley never saw him that way. To Harley, Lucas was the kid who showed up every day. And as fate would have it, when the smoke came pouring through the vents, Lucas would do what he always did. He would show up, even when no one else did. The bond between Lucas and Harley was never something they advertised. It wasn't marked by fist bumps or matching bracelets. No shared inside jokes shouted across the hallway. No social media posts stamped with hashtags and filters. Their friendship was something quieter, something deeper. Like the silence that follows snowfall, still, steady, and heavy with meaning. Harley had been paralyzed since 3rd grade. A car accident, sudden and cruel, had taken away what most kids take for granted: the ability to stand, to run, to climb stairs without thinking. But it didn't take away his fire. If anything, it sharpened it. Lucas was the kind of boy who watched clouds shift for minutes without blinking. The kind who got lost in drawings, who flinched when others laughed too loud. He carried an old sketch pad everywhere, its corners worn soft like a favorite blanket. He never showed the pages to anyone, except Harley. In those pages lived falcons in mid-dive, wolves in snow. Once a fox curled under a thicket of brush, Harley's favorite. He said the eyes looked just like his mother's. Lucas didn't say much in return. He just handed him the drawing and said, "You can keep it." They never told each other best friends. That felt too big, too loud. But when Lucas forgot his lunch, Harley always shared his juice box. And when Harley's hands were too cold to turn the pages of his book, Lucas read aloud in a voice just loud enough for two. Other kids didn't really notice. And when they did, they sometimes laughed. "You two like dating or something?" One boy had sneered in 6th grade. Lucas turned red. Harley didn't flinch. "No," he'd replied calmly. "He's the one person here who doesn't pretend." There wasn't much to say after that. The thing about bonds like theirs is that they grow strongest in quiet places, between the moments, in the unspoken. Harley didn't need someone to push his wheelchair. He needed someone who didn't look at him like a project. Lucas didn't need praise. He just needed someone who saw him without judgment. In class, they worked together when no one else wanted to pair with them. In the cafeteria, they shared the corner table by the radiator. Every Friday, they brought each other small things: a granola bar, a new pencil, a page torn from a magazine about birds or trains. Nothing expensive, just real. Teachers often said Lucas lacked confidence and needed to participate more. They weren't wrong, but they missed the full picture. They didn't see the way he helped Harley every morning before class, unfolding the footrests of the chair, straightening his sleeves, making sure his notebook was angled just right. They didn't see how Harley would text Lucas every evening after homework, with nothing more than, "You did okay today." And Lucas would write back, "You too." They didn't need more than that. In a world that prized speed, volume, and noise, they had chosen stillness, steadiness, and truth. That kind of connection doesn't just survive, it roots itself. So when the fire came, when everyone else would be running away from the smoke, it wasn't duty or bravery that moved Lucas. It was instinct. It was friendship. It was the silent promise made on a frozen ramp years ago and honored in flame. The school was old, not crumbling or condemned, but old in the way small-town schools often are. Built during a different time, when buildings were made of thick timber and narrow stairwells, before fire codes became stricter and windows came with safety latches. There was charm in its bones: tall windows that bathed classrooms in natural light, oak doors with brass handles worn smooth by decades of small hands, radiators that hissed with life on cold mornings. But there were risks too. Room 12B sat on the second floor, near the end of the west hallway. The building had only one true staircase on that side. An elevator had been installed when Harley enrolled, but it was small and slow, tucked into a tight corner near the faculty lounge. The heating system, a relic from the 1970s, still burned fuel oil. Most days, it worked just fine, but maintenance logs had flagged something weeks before: a flicker in the pilot light, a faint smell near the boiler. No one had found a clear issue, and so it was left to run. That morning, the custodian had walked the halls early, adjusting thermostats. The air was biting outside, and teachers had already begun complaining of cold rooms. He checked the furnace room at 7:15. Everything looked ordinary. No smell, no smoke. What no one saw was the slow leak. A thin hairline fracture in a fuel line, just enough for vapor to escape. The kind that floats, invisible, pooling low in corners where air doesn't move. At 8:12, the boiler kicked on harder than usual. Pressure climbed. A flash of flame licked too far past its casing. A soft pop. The smell of burning insulation. By 8:20, smoke had begun to rise through the floorboards in the southern end of the building. The fire moved slowly at first, creeping, threading through ductwork, warming wood until it began to char. In room 12B, students took notes on volcanoes. Lucas was sketching in the margins of his notebook. Harley was highlighting a line from the textbook, his marker held with care between stiff fingers. Outside their classroom, the air was already changing, just a little warmer, a little drier. The kind of subtle shift no one notices until it's too late. In the nurse's office downstairs, a faint beeping sounded on a smoke detector. She tapped it, annoyed, assuming it was low battery. There was no visible smoke. In the teacher's lounge, someone opened a window, thinking the radiator was just running too hot. At 8:31, a girl in the hallway coughed. At 8:34, the intercom cracked briefly, then went silent. In the office, The principal flipped through papers, not knowing that beneath her feet, a steady flame had found its way into the subfloor. And then came the moment. 8:42. The building's ancient smoke sensors finally caught up. The alarm didn't blare all at once. It stuttered at first. A faint chirp, then a louder one, then the long, shrill wail that drilled into every corridor, every classroom, every ear. The lights flickered red. A voice over the speaker, barely audible. "This is not a drill. Please evacuate." The rest cut off. In room 12B, papers flew. Desks screeched back. Students shouted over one another. The teacher grabbed her emergency clipboard. The air was beginning to taste wrong. And somewhere in the hallway, just beyond that door, the fire was climbing. Panic has a sound. It's not just screaming, though there was plenty of that. It's the scrape of chair legs against tile, the sharp thud of textbooks hitting the floor, the rushed shuffle of sneakers, the frantic thump of hands pounding on a door that won't open fast enough. In room 12B, it all happened at once. Ms. Hartwell's voice strained to cut through the chaos. "Line up at the door. Now! Leave everything!" But children don't move like soldiers. Not in panic. Not when the fire alarm is blaring and the air has started to sting their eyes. Lucas stood still. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Around him, the room became noise and motion. Backpacks were left behind, jackets forgotten. One boy tried to grab his phone from his desk. Miss Hartwell shouted for him to go. Lucas looked down. Harley hadn't moved. His wheelchair was wedged too close to the desk. The angle was tight, the floor uneven. Harley's hands trembled as he tried to grip the wheels, but they wouldn't cooperate. "Lucas." Harley's voice cracked, low and strained. Lucas didn't wait. He bent down, grabbed the front bars of the chair, and tugged. It didn't budge. The desk legs caught on the footrests. The whole thing jerked sideways, tilting dangerously. Lucas let go, steadied it, then crouched lower and began untangling Harley's backpack straps from where they'd hooked around the armrest. The others were already filing out. Miss Hartwell glanced back, counting heads. "Lucas, Harley, come on!" Lucas didn't respond. He was breathing hard. The air felt heavier already. His eyes burned. "I can't," Harley muttered. "Yes, you can," Lucas whispered. The straps were off now. The desk pulled aside. The chair free, but the hallway was already full of movement, and smoke was curling in from under the door. Thick, gray, choking. Harley looked toward the door, then back at Lucas. "You should go." Lucas blinked. For the first time in a long time, his voice was sharp. "No." Then he grabbed Harley under the arms. Lucas had never lifted anything heavier than a bag of dog food before. He didn't go to the gym. He didn't play sports. But something inside him clicked. Not adrenaline, not courage, just the simple, quiet knowledge that he wasn't going to leave. Harley's body was thin but long, awkward to carry. His limbs had little resistance. Lucas hoisted him with effort, arms locked under Harley's chest, knees straining to rise. The wheelchair tipped as he stood. Lucas didn't look back. Smoke was seeping through the air vents now. The room was empty but for them, and the hallway was growing darker. Lucas stepped forward, one foot, then the next. He didn't think about how far the stairs were, or whether he'd make it. He just knew that Harley was breathing too fast, and his own heart was pounding loud enough to drown out the sirens. Outside, the school lawn was filled with students already. Teachers waving clipboards, kids coughing, some crying. but no one noticed who wasn't there yet. Inside, Lucas pushed into the hallway, his arms shaking, his chest burning, and behind him, room 12B filled with smoke. The hallway had changed. Only moments before, it had been just another corridor. Lockers lining the walls, faded posters announcing school play auditions and fundraiser goals. The place where students passed notes, shoved each other playfully, slouched against walls waiting for the bell. Now, it was unrecognizable. Smoke clung low, pooling near the floor like fog, thick and sour in the back of the throat. The fire alarm still screeched above them, each pulse drilling deeper into the mind. The overhead lights flickered, on, then off, then on again. The building seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Lucas tightened his grip. Harley coughed into his shoulder. "Put me down. I'll slow you down." Lucas didn't respond. His arms were already aching. His shoes slipped slightly on the tiled floor as he adjusted his hold, pulling Harley's weight higher against his chest. The stairs were 2 hallways away. They moved past the trophy case, now just a blurred shimmer behind haze. The photos of past basketball teams and faded honor roll names looked ghost-like behind the glass. Lucas's legs shook with each step, not just from the effort, but from the fear. He could feel the heat rising through the soles of his shoes. At the next intersection, a wall vent blew a gust of black smoke straight toward them. Lucas turned his head to shield Harley's face, coughing hard as they passed. There were no other students in sight now. They were alone. Each footstep sounded like it didn't belong. Too soft, too unsure, in a place now built for panic. Harley's voice rasped. "This is crazy. You don't have to." Lucas stopped walking just long enough to whisper, "I know." Then he kept going. Every few steps, he had to shift Harley's weight. His arms were trembling now, a deep burn settling into his shoulders. His eyes watered, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The fire had reached the first floor by now. Somewhere, a sprinkler had finally activated. Too little, too late. And the smell of wet ash joined the smoke. Then, at the far end of the corridor, he saw it. The elevator. But the red light above the door was blinking. Out of order. Lucas stared at it for 2 seconds too long, his legs going still, his breath shallow. No elevator. No time. There was only one choice now. The stairs. He turned, willed his legs to carry him forward. His vision narrowed, every sound muffled as if underwater. And there, ahead, was the staircase door. Heavy, metal, closed. He reached it, kicked it open with his foot, and was hit by a wave of heat. The stairwell itself had begun to fill with smoke, too. Not thick yet, but rising. Lucas blinked against the sting, looked down at the steps, dozens of them. Harley stirred in his arms. Lucas. He didn't answer. He adjusted his grip, braced himself against the railing, and took the first step down. Then another, and another. The building groaned around them. Somewhere far off, something cracked. The sound of wood splitting under stress. The smell of burning insulation hit hard now, mixed with melted plastic, metal, something chemical. Lucas's foot slipped once on the 6th step. He caught himself barely by grabbing the railing. Harley gasped. They froze for a breath. Lucas whispered, "Almost there." But they weren't. The staircase curved, a full flight and a half to the ground floor. Lucas blinked sweat out of his eyes. His knees shook with each step, but he kept moving, as though the stairs would vanish if he stopped. One step, then another, then another. the smoke followed them down. By the time they reached the bottom of the staircase, Lucas could no longer feel his arms. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. Each inhale scorched his throat. Each exhale felt like it took more than it gave back. But Harley was still in his arms, still breathing. The main hallway on the ground floor was clearer, for now. The fire hadn't breached this end of the building fully yet, but the smoke was coming. You could feel it. The way the air shifted, too warm and too still. Lucas staggered forward. There was no one in sight. Not yet. The school staff had guided most students to the back lot, the designated fire evacuation zone. Emergency responders were only just arriving. The front of the building remained quieter, more isolated. Lucas didn't know that. He didn't know where anyone had gone, didn't know which doors were safe. He only knew he had to get Harley outside. Now the front entrance was ahead. Large double doors, glass panels fogged with condensation and smoke residue. A weak winter sun glowed behind them. He moved toward it, legs shaking violently now. Halfway down the hallway, he stumbled. His right knee buckled. He caught himself on the lockers, one hand pressed hard against the cold metal, Harley still cradled with the other arm. He gasped, a sound almost like a sob, but he didn't fall. Instead, he slid down slowly until both knees touched the ground. Lucas? Harley tried to sit up to shift his weight off him, but his legs wouldn't move, his arms barely worked. Lucas just shook his head, barely able to breathe. Just give me a second. The world around them was a swirl of haze and orange light. For a few seconds, they just sat there. A boy who could not walk, and the boy who everyone thought never would act. And then, a sound. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Boots. The door at the far end of the hall burst open, and through the smoky blur, a firefighter emerged, helmeted, masked, axe in hand. He stopped when he saw them, two figures on the floor, not 10 feet from the door. He called something, but the words were muffled through his mask. Lucas looked up. The firefighter ran. In seconds, he was there. He crouched, checked both boys, fingers on Harley's neck, hand briefly against Lucas's cheek. Lucas tried to speak, but no sound came out. The man didn't wait. He scooped Harley into his arms with practiced strength. Another firefighter appeared behind him, this one reaching for Lucas. Lucas tried to wave him off, shook his head, but his body gave out. His legs folded, his eyes fluttered, and the world dimmed into ash and heat and silence. Outside, the cold air screamed against scorched lungs as the doors burst open and two boys were carried to safety. The sun was shining. The crowd in the schoolyard was loud now. Gasps, names being called, arms outstretched. Teachers ran. A girl screamed. Someone dropped a clipboard, and Harley's mother. She dropped to her knees, because through the smoke, they were there, alive, together. The world came back in fragments. First, sound, distant, muffled voices, the hum of engines, the short bursts of walkie-talkies. Then sensation, cold air against flushed skin, the sting of oxygen through a mask, the press of a blanket around trembling shoulders. Lucas opened his eyes, slowly. Above him, the sky was pale and wide. He was lying on a stretcher outside, surrounded by people moving with purpose. For a moment, he didn't remember why. Then his eyes flicked sideways, and there, not far away, another stretcher. Harley. He was awake, breathing through a mask, face pale, but alive. Lucas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. A medic noticed he was awake and came closer, checking vitals, speaking in a gentle, rhythmic voice. Lucas could only nod. His body ached, deep, muscular aches that throbbed beneath every breath. But it didn't matter. He turned his head again, past Harley this time, and saw the school. The building he'd walked into that morning as a boy no one paid much attention to was now billowing smoke from shattered windows. One corner of the roof had partially collapsed. Firefighters were still working, dousing embers, moving through the wreckage. And yet somehow, both of them had made it out. Minutes passed, then footsteps approached again. Different ones this time. Lucas. It was Miss Hartwell. Her voice trembled as she knelt beside him. "You saved him. You saved Harley." Lucas didn't know what to say. She placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't leave him behind." He shook his head. Couldn't. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. No more words were needed. Behind them, someone clapped. Then another. A cluster of students had gathered by the yellow tape, watching. And as Lucas sat up slowly, unsteady, unsure, they applauded. Not loud, not wild, just a soft, rising wave of recognition. From kids who had once ignored him, teased him, underestimated him. Lucas blinked against the brightness of the sun, and for the first time, he didn't want to disappear into the background. Harley caught his eye from the other stretcher, gave a tired thumbs up. Lucas smiled back. They were both still breathing, and that felt like enough for now. The hospital room was quiet. Soft beeps from machines marked the rhythm of recovery. Thin morning light filtered through beige curtains, and in the corner, a vase of flowers sat. Not expensive, just cheerful. Probably from the school. Lucas sat upright in bed, arms resting on his lap, IV taped to his wrist. It had been 2 days. 2 days since the fire. 2 days since everything changed. The doctors said he'd be fine. Dehydration, smoke inhalation, some muscle strain, nothing lasting. He'd pushed his body further than it had ever gone before, but it had held. Across the hallway, in another room, Harley was recovering too. His condition had been more fragile, his lungs weaker, but he was stable now, awake, and asking for Lucas. That morning, a nurse brought a wheelchair to Lucas's bedside. "You up for a little ride?" she asked kindly. He nodded, slowly. Every movement was sore, like every part of his body had remembered the weight it carried. But the pain was honest. It reminded him that what he'd done was real. As they rolled into Harley's room, Lucas expected silence. Maybe awkwardness, maybe a weak smile. Instead, Harley grinned. "You look like crap." Lucas laughed. It hurt his ribs, but it was worth it. "You're not exactly glowing either." Harley motioned weakly to the side of his bed. "Got a medal yet? Or just universal awe and admiration?" "Just a pudding cup and a lot of wires." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Harley's voice changed, softer. "You didn't have to come back for me." Lucas looked at him. "I never left." The words hung between them, true, simple. "I would have died in there." "You didn't." Harley nodded. "Because of you." Lucas looked away, out the window. "I think anyone would have done the same." Harley gave a small shake of his head. Number they wouldn't. The quiet stretched again, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, just full. Later that day, the principal visited. She brought a note from the district, a small certificate and more flowers. She called Lucas a young man of remarkable courage. Lucas didn't quite know what to say to that. Courage. It felt like too big a word, too shiny, too far from the scared boy who had once hidden in corners, avoided eye contact, and let life move around him. But maybe, just maybe, that boy had stepped aside, even if just for one day, and someone else had stood in his place. Not a hero, just a friend. The fire made the local news, then the state news, then, somehow, the national news. It wasn't just the fire itself, or the damage to the old school building. It was the story within the story. The image of a 14-year-old carrying his paralyzed best friend down a smoke-filled stairwell. The headlines were clear and bold. Teen hero carries friend to safety in school fire. The weakest boy in class was the strongest that day. A bond stronger than fear. Lucas didn't read most of them. Harley, on the other hand, saved them all. He printed them, clipped them, even made a little folder he titled, "Stuff That Proves Lucas is a Legend." Lucas rolled his eyes every time he saw it, but he didn't throw it away. The story spread fast. Within days, there were interview requests, TV stations calling the hospital, local officials asking for statements. Lucas avoided them all. He didn't want the spotlight. He hadn't done it for applause. He hadn't done it to prove anything. He'd done it because Harley was his friend, because the idea of leaving him behind wasn't an option. Still, the world kept calling him brave, and slowly, gently, the school began to change around him. People who had never spoken to him now paused in the hallways. They smiled, said hi, sat beside him at lunch. Teachers nodded with new respect. Even the older kids, the ones who had once used him as a punchline, now seemed unsure how to act. They didn't joke. They didn't nudge. They looked at him differently now, like maybe they had missed something all along. Lucas wasn't sure how to handle it. Part of him wanted to hide again. Part of him didn't trust it. The sudden kindness, the careful words. But Harley helped. Every time Lucas shrank from the attention, Harley would say, "Let them see you." And so he tried, one step at a time. They returned to school 2 weeks later. The building was half closed, entire wings cordoned off by caution tape. Classes were held in temporary rooms. The gym doubled as a cafeteria. Everything smelled faintly of smoke and disinfectant. But Lucas didn't mind, because when he pushed Harley's wheelchair through the front doors that morning, something shifted. Students moved aside, teachers smiled, and someone clapped again, just once, before everyone followed. Not in mockery, not for show, but in quiet, sincere welcome. Lucas didn't wave. He just kept pushing the chair, Harley grinning at his side. And for the first time in his life, the path in front of him didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt open. Life, of course, didn't become perfect. Some days were still awkward. Some students still whispered too loudly or stared too long. The fire didn't erase old habits overnight, and Lucas still had moments where he felt like retreating into silence, into the comfort of not being noticed. But something had shifted, deep, steady, and unshakable. It wasn't about how others saw him. It was about how he saw himself. In the weeks that followed, Lucas began to move through school differently. Not louder, not bigger, just steadier. When he raised his hand in class now, he didn't hesitate. When a group project came around, someone always asked him first, not last, to join. When Harley needed help getting to the science wing, Lucas was there as always. But now sometimes, other students offered too. Small things, but honest. And as spring crept into the year, Lucas began to rebuild. Not just his strength, but something deeper. Ms. Hartwell invited him to join a mentoring group. "Just once," she said. "Talk to some younger kids. Tell your story." He almost said no, but Harley nudged him. They don't need a hero, he said. Just someone who's been through the fire and kept walking. So Lucas went. He stood in front of 8 sixth graders and told them what it felt like. To be small, to be scared, to carry someone heavier than you thought possible. He didn't speak in perfect sentences. He paused often. But the room was quiet, eyes wide, faces leaning forward. When he finished, a girl raised her hand. Were you afraid? Lucas didn't lie. Yes. She thought about that, then nodded. Me too. A lot. He smiled. That's okay. You can still do something brave. The words weren't planned, but as he said them, they felt truer than anything he'd ever written in a school essay. You can still do something brave. He started writing more after that. Quiet essays, stories, a journal that he didn't show anyone yet, not even Harley. Because now he knew his voice mattered, not because it was loud, but because it was real. The invitation came in a plain envelope. No fancy gold trim, no heavy seal, just a school envelope slipped into Lucas's locker one afternoon, among old flyers and untouched homework reminders. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single typed letter. Dear Lucas, you have been nominated by the faculty and administration of Jefferson Middle School to receive the State Youth Valor Award. His eyes stopped there. He read it again, twice. Valor. It didn't feel like his word. It belonged in old stories, soldier stories, newspaper tributes to people who ran into burning buildings. Not someone like him. Someone who was still figuring out how to speak without stammering when too many eyes were watching. He tucked the letter into his notebook, unsure whether to mention it at all. But Harley found out before the end of the day. You got the letter? Harley asked, wheeling up beside him at dismissal. Lucas blinked. You knew? I may or may not have dropped a hint to Ms. Hartwell. Lucas groaned. Harley, she said you deserved it. I agreed. Don't argue with educators. Lucas didn't reply. You gonna go? Harley asked, more gently this time. Lucas looked down. I don't want to stand on a stage. Harley leaned back in his chair. You already carried me through fire. A little stage isn't going to hurt you. The ceremony was 3 weeks away, in the state capitol. It would be small, just a few awardees, their families, some state officials. Still, it felt enormous. When the day came, Lucas wore a shirt that felt too stiff, shoes that pinched his toes, and a tie that Harley helped him straighten before they left. The auditorium was warm, full of polished floors and soft murmurs. Lucas sat between his parents, their hands clasped together, Harley grinning 2 seats down. When his name was called, he stood. He walked to the stage. The applause was quiet but constant. He kept his head up. The presenter, a tall woman with a gentle smile, handed him the plaque and spoke into the microphone. For exceptional courage in the face of danger, and for carrying not just a friend, but the spirit of compassion and loyalty. Lucas didn't speak. He simply nodded. He didn't need to say anything. Because sometimes, courage speaks best in silence. As he walked back to his seat, he glanced at Harley. Harley wiped at his eyes, dramatically, of course, and mouthed, "Legend." Lucas shook his head. But maybe deep down, a small part of him was starting to believe it too. Spring melted into summer, and with it came a quieter kind of healing. The story faded from the news cycle, as all stories do. New headlines came and went, and the world kept spinning. But in Lucas's life, the impact lingered, not loud, not flashing, just there, like a steady drumbeat beneath everyday moments. He and Harley spent afternoons in the park. The kind of slow, sun-drenched days they'd never really had before the fire. Harley's chair moved more easily now. The school had raised funds to upgrade it, part of the post-fire support wave. Lucas learned how to maneuver curbs, tilt it just enough for uneven sidewalks, dodge tree roots with practiced grace. Chariot master, Harley joked once. Quiet cargo, Lucas replied. They laughed. They laughed more now than they used to. Somewhere along the way, Lucas realized something strange. He was happy. Not all the time. Not in a perfect storybook way, but in flashes, in the ease of his friend's voice beside him, in the way his parents started asking about his day and actually listening, in the way Ms. Hartwell had invited him to help lead a writing workshop for the younger grades. "I think you've got a voice worth sharing," she said. And slowly, carefully, Lucas began to believe her. He started writing regularly, not for grades, not for approval, just for himself. Pages filled with moments he didn't want to lose. Memories from before the fire. Images from that day that still pulsed quietly in his chest. Things he never said out loud. Sometimes he wrote about Harley. More often, he wrote about the way courage didn't feel like a battle cry, but like a whisper that said, "Go." In July, he submitted a short essay to a statewide writing contest. He didn't expect anything. When the letter came, he didn't tell anyone at first. He waited until he and Harley were sitting by the pond at the edge of the park, their spot as it had quietly become, before he handed over the envelope. Harley read the first line and grinned so hard his face nearly split. "You won." Lucas nodded. "Second place." "That's still winning." Lucas looked out at the water. The sky was streaked with soft gold. The air smelled of warm earth and cut grass. He didn't feel like the quiet kid in the corner anymore. He didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. And more than that, he felt real. Not because of the fire, not because of the plaque, but because he had walked through fear and come out the other side still holding on to who he was and who he was becoming. Late that summer, a new construction site appeared beside the school. The old East Wing, the one damaged beyond repair in the fire, had finally been torn down. What would rise in its place was still wrapped in scaffolding and caution signs. But rumors flew quickly. A new library, updated science labs, wheelchair-accessible everything. Progress. But even before the first beam was lifted, something else quietly took shape. A plaque, mounted on a smooth granite pedestal just inside the main hallway. It wasn't large, it didn't shine, but it held words that stopped students in their tracks. In honor of the quiet strength that carried another through fire, for Lucas Martin, your courage lit the way. Lucas didn't know about it until the unveiling. Ms. Hartwell had organized it with the school board, kept it quiet, even from Harley. The whole school was gathered, a short assembly, few speeches, and then a cloth pulled back to reveal words carved into stone. When Lucas saw it, he didn't speak. He stood still, eyes tracing every letter. Harley leaned over in his chair. "That's your name, like forever." Lucas whispered, "I don't know if I deserve it." Harley just smiled. "That's why you do." There was a moment, brief and weightless, where Lucas felt everything at once. The heat of the fire, the sound of his own heartbeat in those stairs. Harley's voice calling his name, the strength that came from somewhere deep and unknown, and now this. A hallway full of kids, teachers, parents, all looking not at the fire's ruins, but at its meaning. That night, Lucas and Harley walked the length of the rebuilt sidewalk behind the school. The sky above was deep blue, just beginning to show stars. The summer air was warm, still humming with life. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Eventually, Harley asked, "Do you ever miss who you were before all this?" Lucas took a long breath. "Number, I think. I finally grew into who I was meant to be." Harley nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can see that." There were still things Lucas didn't understand. Still pieces of himself he was discovering. But now he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes it takes fire to reveal what's already been inside you all along. And once it's out, once you've carried it through the smoke and fear and weight of the world, it doesn't go back into hiding. It becomes who you are. The new school year arrived with earlier mornings and cooler winds. Lucas stood at the edge of the hallway on the first day, watching as students filed in, some familiar, some new. There were fresh backpacks, nervous glances, the usual swirl of chatter. But this year, Lucas wasn't invisible. He wasn't the kid people looked through. He was the one they nodded to, the one they noticed. Harley rolled up beside him, a pencil tucked behind his ear, a notebook in his lap. "Senior vibes, huh?" Lucas smirked. "We're in 8th grade. Still counts, top of the food chain." Lucas shook his head, but it felt different this time. Not like the start of something he had to survive. More like the next chapter of something he was finally shaping. First period was language arts with Miss Hartwell again, by request. She smiled when he entered and handed him a folder. "Writing mentor," she said. "That's you now." Inside were a list of 6th graders who had signed up for extra writing help. Shy kids, quiet kids, the kind Lucas used to be. He sat beside one of them later that day. A small boy with a nervous cough and a stutter that reminded Lucas of his own voice once. "I can't write stories," the boy said softly. Lucas leaned in. "You don't have to yet. Just tell me something true." The boy looked up, surprised, then nodded. They wrote for 15 quiet minutes. Lucas didn't give advice. He just listened. And something opened in that silence. The kind of trust that doesn't come from loud speeches, but from the calm presence of someone who understands. During lunch, Lucas and Harley returned to their usual bench under the maple tree. The leaves had just started to turn. It would be fall soon. The air already hinted at it, crisp and expectant. "Think we'll be legends by the end of the year?" Harley asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. Lucas grinned. "Just you." "Lies, we're a team." They sat in the shade, easy in each other's silence. Because while the fire had changed everything, burned through the walls and peeled back the facades, what remained was stronger than ever. A friendship forged not in popularity or convenience, but in loyalty. A strength tested not in the gym, but in a stairwell filled with smoke, and a boy who once thought he had nothing to offer, learning that he had carried everything that mattered. Not for glory, not for fame, but because when it mattered most, he didn't leave someone behind. Autumn came slowly, as if the world itself wanted to linger in warmth just a little longer. By mid-October, the leaves had painted the town in rust and gold. The mornings were cold enough for jackets, and the smell of wood smoke curled through the streets like a quiet song. Lucas began to walk to school alone. Not because Harley wasn't there, they still met up before first bell, but because something in him needed the stillness. The rhythm of his own footsteps, the way breath fogged in front of him. It gave him space to think. Some mornings he replayed that day in the stairwell, the sound of the fire, the weight of Harley on his back. But more often now, he didn't need to. It had stopped haunting him. It had become part of him. One Thursday, Miss Hartwell pulled him aside. "There's a reporter," she said gently. "Local paper. Wants to do a small piece for Fire Prevention Week. Nothing flashy." Lucas hesitated. "Why me?" Miss Hartwell smiled. "Because you were there, and because you remember what matters." Lucas agreed, quietly, and that weekend, a woman named Joanna met him and Harley at the park bench by the pond. She was kind. No camera, no recorder, just a pen and a notebook. She asked about the fire, but also about the after, about school, about writing, about what courage meant now. Harley chimed in often, teasing Lucas, making jokes, telling his side of things with the easy humor of someone who'd survived something unthinkable and decided to keep laughing anyway. At one point, Joanna leaned forward. "What do you want people to understand?" she asked Lucas. When they read this, he looked down for a long time, then said softly, "That being strong doesn't mean being fearless. It means doing the hard thing even when you're terrified." She nodded and didn't ask anything more. The article came out the following week. It was one page, tucked inside the Sunday paper, with a photo of Lucas and Harley sitting under their tree, leaves drifting around them like slow-motion confetti. Lucas didn't show it to many people, but he folded it gently and placed it inside his journal. Not for praise, not for memory, but as a marker, a quiet reminder that even stories born in fire can grow into something soft and true and worth sharing. By winter, the rhythm of life had settled into something steady. The scar left by the fire was no longer raw. The new East Wing stood tall, clean, and bright, filled with windows and warm light. Inside, laughter returned to the halls. Not loud or careless, but real. Lucas didn't think of himself as brave anymore. He thought of himself as someone who had done what needed to be done. That was enough. He still met Harley every morning, still mentored younger writers, still walked home under skies turning earlier to dusk. But something else had started to shift inside him. A quiet urge that wouldn't go away. He wanted to write the story down. Not a short essay, not a contest piece, the story, all of it. He didn't know how to begin. For weeks, he stared at blank pages, unsure if he had the right to put something so heavy into words. Unsure if anyone would understand. Harley noticed. "Still stuck?" he asked one afternoon, wheeling beside him as they left the library. Lucas nodded. I don't want it to be about me." Harley shrugged. "Then don't make it about you. Make it about what mattered." That night, Lucas sat by the window in his room, laptop open, cold air whispering through the glass. He typed one sentence. There was a boy who thought he was the weakest in the room, until the fire came, and the words began to come. They didn't rush. They unfolded, like breath. He wrote for hours, then days, then weeks, not to be published, not to impress, just to give shape to something that lived inside him. He wrote about the stairs, the silence, the weight. He wrote about fear, but more than that, he wrote about the choice, to turn back, or to carry forward. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was honest. And in writing it, he didn't just relive the fire. He rewrote what it meant. One night in December, he printed out the pages, clipped them together, and handed them to Harley without a word. Harley read it over 2 nights. When he was done, he looked up. "It's good," he said. "Really good." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" Harley nodded solemnly. "Okay, fine. It made me cry, but only a little." And I'm not crying now, you are. Lucas laughed. It felt like the release of something long held in. They sat in silence again, their usual bench now frosted at the edges. Harley turned to him. You should share it. Lucas hesitated. You don't have to, Harley added. But someone out there might need it. Might need to know they can carry more than they think. Lucas looked at the pages in his lap. He didn't know what he would do yet, but the thought stayed with him, that his words, like his courage, might reach further than he ever imagined. The first snow fell gently that year. It blanketed the schoolyard in soft, white, muffling footsteps, quieting the world. For the first time since the fire, everything felt truly still. Lucas walked the perimeter of the school after class, the path crunching under his boots. Beside the rebuilt east wing, he stopped to look at the plaque again. The granite was dusted with snow. He brushed it off with his glove, tracing the carved words once more with his fingers. He wasn't sure why he came here. Maybe to remember. Maybe just to feel how far he'd come. A voice behind him broke the silence. You always come here alone? It was Ms. Hartwell, bundled in her thick scarf and holding a travel mug. Lucas shrugged. Sometimes. She joined him in front of the plaque, her gaze gentle. I read your story, she said. Lucas looked up, surprised. Harley had shown her. I hope that's okay, she added. Lucas gave a slow nod. She was quiet for a while, then said, You know, people think bravery is some kind of roar, a shout, a leap. But most of the time it's just choosing to step forward when every part of you wants to run. Lucas didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She sipped her tea, then turned to him with a soft smile. Would you read it aloud at the assembly next month? His eyes widened. In front of everyone? Only if you want to. He looked back at the plaque, at the snow curling around its edges, at the frozen grass that would green again come spring, at the hallway just beyond, where fire once raged. He nodded slowly. I think I do. Miss Hartwell placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. Then I'll save you a seat on the stage. That night, Lucas practiced in his room. At first, his voice faltered. The words felt too big. But with each reading, something loosened. Not just nerves, something deeper. Shame. Fear. The echo of the moment he thought he was small. He read the line. There was a boy who thought he was the weakest in the room. Then paused, then breathed, and continued. He wasn't reading about someone else anymore. He was becoming the voice of the truth he had lived, and it no longer frightened him. The day of the assembly came with blue skies and sharp air. Inside the auditorium, students buzzed with low voices, the seats filling slowly with parents, teachers, and classmates. A banner stretched across the back of the stage. Voices of courage. Lucas stood backstage, the printed pages trembling lightly in his hands. He wore a navy sweater, simple and warm, the kind that didn't try to make him look like someone he wasn't. Harley rolled up beside him, dressed in his sharpest flannel. Hey, you okay? Lucas gave a shallow nod. Harley grinned. You want me to distract the audience with shadow puppets? Lucas huffed a laugh. I'll be right in the front row, Harley said. If you forget a word, I'll mouth it at you. Or just yell it. Super subtle. Lucas looked out at the crowd. Teachers he admired, students he once avoided, kids from other grades, some of whom had never even heard the whole story. This wasn't just a retelling anymore. It was a testimony. When Ms. Hartwell stepped up to the podium and introduced him, there was a soft wave of applause. Lucas stepped out into the light, pages in hand, heart pounding. He scanned the crowd, found Harley's eyes, and began. The first few words came slowly. There was a boy who thought he was the weakest in the room. His voice was clear, steady. It echoed gently in the vast space. As he spoke, silence fell. Not stiff or expectant, but listening. Deep, respectful listening. He didn't perform, he remembered. And as the story unfolded, the stares, the smoke, the fear, the weight, something moved across the audience. Not tears, not awe, something quieter. Recognition. A teacher wiped their eye. A sixth-grade girl leaned forward in her seat. By the time Lucas reached the final line, even he felt something shift in his chest, like he was finally setting something down. And the boy who had always thought he was small carried something enormous that day. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. There was a stillness at the end, a breath, then applause, rising, then sustained. Not loud, not explosive, but full, whole. Afterward, students came up to him. A quiet boy from the library handed him a note. Another girl, one who'd once laughed when he tripped, just nodded and said, "Thanks." Lucas didn't need more than that. He walked off stage lighter than he had in months. Harley bumped his elbow. "Told you." Lucas grinned. "You did." And as they walked out of the auditorium into the crisp afternoon light, Lucas felt it. Not the heat of the fire or the weight of memory, but the warmth of something enduring, something earned. Spring arrived not all at once, but in quiet offerings. A single bud on a tree branch, a shift in the light. The way jackets gave way to rolled sleeves. And in those slow changes, something inside Lucas shifted too. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but unmistakably. He no longer looked at himself as the boy who froze. He was now the boy who moved. One step, one choice, one breath at a time. The story he had read aloud at the assembly was picked up by a regional publication, a small magazine that focused on student writing. Then, unexpectedly, a teacher from a neighboring school reached out. They wanted him to come speak. Just a short talk. No pressure. Lucas almost said no, but Harley tilted his head and said, "Isn't this what you said? Someone out there might need it." So he went. It was a middle school gym this time. Fewer people, less fanfare. But when Lucas finished reading, a kid in the back, maybe 11, with a quiet voice and a nervous twitch in his hands, walked up and whispered, "I'm scared all the time. But you made me think maybe I can still do something good." Lucas bent to meet his eyes and said, "You already did." From that moment, it wasn't about the fire anymore. It was about what followed. He kept writing, not just his own story, but others too. Stories of strength in small places, of kids who never thought they'd matter, and yet changed something just by being there. He wrote about fear, about softness, about how courage is quiet most of the time. And with Harley by his side, he began helping others write their own stories. Kids who didn't think they had anything to say, until someone listened. In late May, on the anniversary of the fire, the school held a remembrance. No speeches, no ceremony, just a gathering under the rebuilt wing. Lucas stood there with Harley, sunlight falling over the plaque, the new bricks warm against his back. Ms. Hartwell approached, holding something small. It was a keychain, a miniature fireman's badge. She handed it to Lucas. "It's not official," she said, "but it's real." He turned it over in his palm. It was simple, worn, honest, like the story he had lived. They didn't stay long. The air smelled of spring and new things growing. Lucas and Harley walked away side by side, backpacks slung over their shoulders. silence comfortable between them. And as they turned the corner past the old gym, Harley looked over and said, "You were never the weakest in the room, you know." Lucas didn't reply. He just smiled, because he didn't need to believe it anymore. He had already become it. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks on trembling legs down a burning hallway. Sometimes it carries more than its body should allow, not because it is fearless, but because someone else needs it to be strong. Lucas was never the biggest, never the fastest, never the one who stood out in a crowd. But when the moment came, when the air burned and the smoke closed in, he made a choice. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for a friend. That single act, born of loyalty and instinct, became a turning point not just in a day, but in a life. And what followed, the rebuilding, the writing, the quiet leadership, became the real measure of his strength. Because true heroes don't just survive the fire, they grow from it, they carry others through it, and when the embers fade, they remain, steady, present, and quietly changed. Lucas may never have seen himself as a hero, but for one boy in a wheelchair, and for every student who watched, listened, and quietly believed, he became one. Not the kind in capes, but the kind who keeps showing up, day after day, step after step, choice after choice. And somewhere, even now, another quiet student may be watching, listening, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember his story and find the strength to carry someone else, even when they feel like the weakest in the room. Because sometimes, that's where the strongest hearts begin.